Yes, we're coming to the end, so we'll take a couple more. One quick round of three. Okay.
To help promote our cause, in terms of engaging with community groups, do you think that we can attach resilience, say, into Christianity?
Okay. Is that specifically Christianity, or?
It's our main faith.
Okay.
Mine was just a kind of a closed question and just a yes/no, really. You don't have to expand it so much. In terms of resilience and things in that area, I just wanted to ask, do you think it would be better over time that we all worked on ourselves more than each other, and that comes from kind of distracting ourselves less and making ourselves aware of things more, and then interacting secondary with other people once we're robust and secure and stuff like
that. One more.
I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I noticed a slight difference between good community resilience and bad community resilience. The urgency that we need to address, the coming financial crisis. The last time this country had a big crisis, they coped quite well, Dig for Victory and all that, but it was a long time ago. Does anyone want to mention Cuba, who had the same problems just 20 years ago?
Okay. Cuba. What's the start on Cuba?
Go on, what can you tell us about Cuba?
Cuba. Well, all right, I'll tell you about Cuba. I think the thing about Cuba, that I think about Cuba, was that it was rather like before the Second World War, that there were people who could see that the Second World War was about to happen, and they thought, what we're going to need, we're going to need aeroplanes. And what they started building, they designed a Spitfire. And they went to the government and said, you need an aeroplane, and we got one. They said, oh, no, we're going to have peace in our time. And then the war broke out, and they said, bloody hell, we need aeroplanes. And they said, well, you already got one. And it was a bit the same in Cuba, that the organic farmers were trying to persuade the government to go organic. They said, no, we don't need that stuff. We've got loads of oil coming from Russia and all that kind of stuff. And we don't need to worry about it. But then when the shit hit the fan, or the oil no longer came into the port, then the farmers were suddenly taken a lot more seriously. So, I think what we're doing here, we don't need to underestimate what we're doing here, is actually like, in a butterfly, imaginal cells. We don't have to persuade everybody, but the ideas are out there and being seeded out there. So I think that agrees. And I think if you come and see the film tonight, if you haven't actually seen it before, which is the Paul Hawken talk about the other superpower, huge things are happening that, because they're not reported in the media, they're not recognised as being big and significant, but big and significant things are happening, and we are part of that. So, Cuba, there's also Argentina, which collapsed in 2001, where the banks closed, literally, the ATMs closed, 35 people were shot dead the first day. What happened next was that the people got together on street corners and figured out what to do next. And that was really a good example of where the community turned to each other and not on each other. And the fear is, and I heard it here yesterday, something saying, the shit will hit the fan, and what should you do? You should get guns. I think, somebody said that to me last night in the sauna, and.
Is that a gun in your swimming trunk?
Well, I was in the sauna, so it's kind of obvious, but.
Why is that such a bad idea?
Because it's it attracts more guns to you, and it's a very short-term solution. It's not the real defence is in community. I think we've heard quite a few times to really build resilience, and there's no time like starting in the present. Just to add to the question of my take-home is, if you want to take home something, get to know your neighbours.
Yeah.
Get to know your neighbours. Do you know the neighbours next door? What about 3 doors up? What about 5 doors up? That was what happened in Argentina. They lived like us. They didn't know their neighbours. And they had to start making soup kitchens in places because the middle classes lost all their jobs, everything closed, and with people that they hadn't known in the block of flats that they'd lived in. So the key thing is to start getting to know the people around you, because now we live in a world where you can have your friends over here and work over there and entertainment over here, and the people you live right next door to you don't know. So that's my take on it.
I'd like to address your question about resilience and Christianity. If you look at a lot of religious groups, they're actually really well prepared. Like, for instance, the Mormon Church in America has a whole series of canning facilities all around the country. And you can actually go there and take your food and get them to can it for you. So, there's a lot of communities that are getting prepared for this sort of, for resilience. And I think that we have to see it outside as, a different sphere than the transition conversation. A lot of times I feel this debate's come back to really kind of being about transition, whereas resilience is like, there are similarities, like, for instance, community bonds are really, really important, but they are different. This is really about being prepared, and it's about being prepared now. There isn't a timeline with this. And I think the person who pointed out the elephant in the room, which is the prospect of an imminent economic collapse across the world. So this is a situation that we all might have to be dealing with in a relatively short time frame. And I know a lot of people are waking up to that now, and I think that's really important. And it's I think it's important to keep it as positive as possible. But resilience is also about addressing people's fears. But it's bringing it to the surface. It's having that conversation in such a way that you're actually then taking a positive step, because that's what redeems it. So I think it's also good to not like have a complete separation. I only want to talk about resilience if it's positive. Is to say, okay, well, there's this stuff and there's that stuff, and there's some potentially very difficult things that we all might have to be living through in the short and medium term. So it's about like, okay, well, getting an idea of what those might possibly be, and then doing something about it. And that's the positive thing. The positive thing is actually doing something. And I'd just like to say, you said something about good and bad community resilience. Well, there might, I kind of agree with you that, like, looking at the government's plans for resilience, that's pretty lame mostly, and reflects their interests. But I don't think there's any such thing as bad community resilience.
Addressing the Christianity question, it's interesting because my first sort of default would be to look at that and start a kind of ideological debate in my head around Christianity and spirituality and faith and and all of this sort of thing. But actually, my experience on the ground is completely different to where that side of my brain would take me. In Bristol, with the work that we've been doing around the No Tesco campaign, and then the sort of creating the positive solutions on the back of that. I mean, it's just so obvious that in Stokes Croft, where it's all been playing out, I mean, there's a huge Christian kind of movement there. There's, a massive church there, and there's an organisation called Love Bristol that own a lot of properties and are doing a lot of community work. We'd be absolutely mad if we didn't want to work with them, actually at a community level they share so many similarities in terms of what we're trying to do. And I think one of the things I find most challenging as someone who is very passionate about what they believe and has got a lot of opinions, but we all need to loosen our grip on needing to be right. Do you know what I mean? Because we're never ever going to create a world whereby the transition ideology or whatever it is going to dominate everyone, because everyone's all, the beauty of our world is that everyone is so different. That is its strength. That's where the diversity comes in. So I absolutely think that we really need to embrace working with everyone, and through that working with people we learn, they learn, and then we find ways of meeting everybody's needs. It's not about saying that there's a right or wrong way of doing it or a right or wrong way of thinking. It's about saying, how do we find a process between us all to actually be able to properly listen to each other and properly understand each other, and then meet these very, very communal needs that that we have to address.
I've got a Facebook page called Patrick Whitefield Associates, and every week I have a quote of the week, and I've just got this week's. We all need to release our grip on being right. Is that what you said? That's brilliant. That's also an answer to what we can all do when we go away from here, because we're all convinced we're right, especially me. Well, I actually happen to be right. This is somewhat different. But no, I think that is such a gem, and that is something to take away from this. Just to address the point of the person over there who said, should we work on ourselves before we start doing things with other people? Well, no, because it can take a lifetime, and even then you might feel that your progress has been minimal. So I would say, you know, if we wait till then, we'll wait forever. Let's do both together.
Yeah, I mean, my sense on that question is that actually doing this stuff that actually living a life of service in a time which needs people who are living lives of service more than any time previously actually is a path in itself. You know, that actually that thing of living in service of others, living a life which is based on compassion and service and giving time to transition. Actually, it's not a case of you do one and then you do the other. You do your service, you do your work supporting your community, becoming more resilient, you build the local food networks, you do whatever needs to be done, you support that process, but in doing so, if it's offered with that sense of generosity and kindness, and actually that's really, really very, very powerful. And we get used to this idea of thinking of compassion as something that's a bit kind of woolly and nebulous, but actually it's a very strong, very powerful force. And I think that we do both those things at the same time. And in terms of the question about why is it that we don't need guns, I think actually if we vision forward to actually where we want to go and what we could pull out of this situation and the kind of place where we could end up if we get all this stuff together, I don't see a place for guns and everybody living in a compound in that kind of scenario. For me, actually, we can create something far more skillful than that.
Educating people how to go forward responsibly.
I don't.
So answer my question then. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for a family in order to get to a higher
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
You are.